And we talk about, in our churches, we talk about resurrection and eternity, hopefully more than once a year. We talk about that all the time. Why don't we say anything about how resurrection and eternity impact how we walk with people through the end of life?
Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Mark Townsend, producer. On today's episode, we bring to you a conversation from Acton University 2024 between Acton Director of Programs and Education Dan Churchwell and Scott Rae, Professor of Philosophy and Christian Ethics at Biola University. They discuss medical and business ethics, death, and the resurrection. Acton University is Acton's flagship conference, focused on building the foundations of human freedom and exploring the intersection of faith and free markets. To learn more about Acton University, please visit university.acton.org, and to find additional content from previous Acton Universities, please visit ondemand.acton.org. You can find additional resources in the show notes for this episode, as well as find previous episodes of Acton Line at acton.org/actonline. And if you like this program, you can help us reach even more listeners by sharing it with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We welcome your comments as well. Acton Line is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Welcome, Scott, to Acton Line. We're so glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great to be with you. And as always, I enjoy coming here every year.
Well, speaking of that, you've been here many years, and what brings you back? Why do you enjoy speaking at Acton University?
Well, Talbot's relationship with Acton goes back actually to the year 2000.
Oh, wow.
When you were still doing the Free and Virtuous Society day-long seminars at various college campuses around the country.
Yeah.
And I've been coming to Acton University probably for at least the last 10 years, probably more like the last 15.
Yeah.
And what keeps me coming back is you all keep inviting me back, and so it's not a hard call to say yes
Sure.
to, because there's nothing quite like it that I go to in my professional life. It's sort of distinctively religiously grounded, particularly Christian, but it's ecumenical, I think, in the best sense of that term. And I get exposed to people from all over the world. Every year I sit at the table with people speaking languages that I've never heard before.
Yeah.
I've sat at the table with Polish priests and Nigerian bishops and folks from all over Latin America. I think this year there's the largest contingent from any country outside the United States coming this year.
Yeah.
And so the international flavor to this, I get exposed to a lot of people. In fact, the plenary speaker from the Islamic world was in my session on Tuesday, and I didn't even know it. I didn't put two and two together until afterwards when I got a chance to meet her. And she was a delightful person, but again, a great chance to knock some of these ideas around with people from other worldviews is very stimulating.
We really do try. These are my words. This isn't Acton's formal word, but I think about it as an ideological rock tumbler. When you find a rock with rough edges, you put it in a tumbler, it takes some of the rough edges. And I think for people where we're used to our either denominations or, some of the ways we think, and when you are exposed to a different group like this, it really does take some of those edges off or gives you more context.
Yeah.
So, thank you for saying that. And speaking of why we continue to ask you back, is one of several of your talks, but one in particular is courses is so well attended and rated so highly at the end of the conference, and it's just simply called the theology of work. Why do faith, work, and economics is kind of the sphere we live in. Why do you think that core fundamental idea of theology of work year after year keeps hitting the bell for people?
Well, it's obviously not because of the sizzle in the title that we gave it.
Right. Yeah.
But I think people really want to hear something that is explicitly theologically grounded, which we do. We ground this in the entire big story of the Bible. In fact, I give the audience a 2-minute summary of the big storyline of the Bible. And I think the reason I think it's still well received is because it still is an issue. And I think it's still largely misunderstood in many of our churches, where I think the sacred-secular divide is alive and well and flourishing.
So just let's stop there real quick. What do you mean by sacred-secular divide? That
there are certain things that are really important to God, and there are other things that are not so much. And so the sacred things have to do with the church, evangelism, discipleship, the things that minister to people's souls, as opposed to the things that are most of the place where people spend the majority of their lives, which is in the workplace, and how it got relegated to the not so much area is a long story. But I think for the most part, we have bought into, I think, a soul-body dichotomy, that the things that really count for God's kingdom are things that minister to people's souls, and the body not so much. But we forget that Christ took on a body, which that by itself should tell us that the body in the material world matters to God. And I think we still have this holdover from I think an Aristotelian view of the world, which says that the contemplative life is the highest good for human beings, and the active life is simply a means to that end. I think throughout church history, we've baptized that dichotomy in various ways that I think have not been helpful.
Okay, and it's obviously changed through the centuries, the nuance of where that has come into. I'm thinking of kind of post-World War II, growth in the West particularly. Do you think there's perennial need for us to hear or be encouraged or to think through the theological roots of the idea of theology of work? Is there something unique, Scott, about modern work that maybe lends itself to people not seeing God in it?
Yes.
There's provocative thesis, like David Graeber, his essay, BS Jobs, and there's a whole line of thinking. That's probably the most extreme, but there are good articles and thought, people thinking about that there might be a reason for all of this need for theology of work, because work actually is soul-sucking. What do you think about that?
I think, and there are two reasons for that. One is, I think, in the industrialized world, where mechanization and factory work was sort of the order of the day, it wasn't hard to see how work became dehumanizing. I mean, Henry Ford was well known for saying, why do I get a whole person when all I really want is a pair of hands on the assembly line?
Yeah.
And so I think that has been a significant part of it too. But I think more recently, with the way artificial intelligence is coming for many jobs that were traditionally manned by human beings, I think is another threat to this, to make people say, well, maybe these jobs, they're just jobs. Maybe there's nothing sacred or important about these jobs. If they can be taken over by machines this easily, what's so significant about them? And I think we have to. This is where we have to go back to Scripture and recognize that God ordained work prior to the entrance of sin, not after it. Therefore, work is not your penalty. And I think most people, they would acknowledge that theologically, but they don't live their lives like that. Most people live their lives as though their work is their penalty, and they're working as fast as they can, as hard as they can, to retire, to accumulate, to do something else that they believe is more meaningful to God and to His kingdom.
Yeah, and I personally think I think Christians, particularly Protestants, there's hundreds of books now out on this topic, right? The market's flooded with theology of work.
Yeah,
and
20 years ago that wasn't the case.
Exactly. Yeah, there's been this whole 2-decade movement with conferences and books. But it's these core lectures, like 1.0, 2.0, like there's 2 or 3 main core lectures on this. But then I think a lot of work needs to be done going forward on helping people more. The general conversation is out, and there's access. You're giving excellent lectures. There's 2 or 3 really solid books that anybody could purchase. But I think thinking about where the future of work and where work is headed and what technology and other things, political engagements and economic considerations. I think the Christian faith at work movement can really have a strong impact if we start to think more concretely and discreetly about some of the topics that are people's real concern about modern work.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to see the movement, I think, is becoming a bit more inclusive. But for a long time, it was a white-collar thing.
It was, yeah.
It was a C-suite, executive, and it was mainly what I call a pale, male, and stale movement of essentially older white executives. And I think that's changing, and it's for the good.
Yeah.
And so that's I think one point of significant progress. But I think the movement is having to adapt to some pretty fast-moving and quickly changing technologies. I mean, I'm anybody who writes on this, you can probably count on it being out of date a year from now.
For sure, absolutely.
And I'm working on the 5th edition of my Moral Choices textbook, and
great.
The chapter on technology and artificial intelligence is going to be the last thing I write before it's published, because I don't want to write something and then while it's in press for 6 to 9 months, that material's all out of date, and I got to start over again.
Yeah,
which I think is a real possibility.
Yeah, it is, and we'll get to a question down the road here in a few minutes about some of the speed of the modern world. But I was reflecting back. I think you and I first met 20 years ago. I lived in Southern California and was able to take some classes at Talbot School of Theology for a year and a half, and you were one of my professors 20 years ago. And I remember
longer than either of us would like to.
I know. Isn't that wild? But your ethics courses and David Horner's, he taught kind of historical ethics, these kinds of things that have stuck with me for 20 years, and I loved my experience at Talbot. But you've been at the institution. You're 36 years in at one institution. I mean, you've seen a lot of change, not only in higher ed in general, but Christian higher ed seems to be going through its own kind of evolution within an evolution. So what is it? I mean, I don't even know where I want to go with this question necessarily, because that's where have you seen like the most significant change, I guess, in your 36 years? And maybe I'm not asking you to be prophetic, but where do you see it going?
Well, if I could be accurately prophetic, I could retire.
Yeah, exactly.
Today. Yeah. And let's just put it this way: there's been a lot of change, and some of it is really good. I think Christian higher ed in particular has become a bit more inclusive, and I think we are embracing that. I think in a good sense, and we have a theologically grounded, solid biblical basis for our emphasis on diversity, which I think is a good thing.
For sure.
But we're heading into a demographic problem for all of higher education, and this year in 2024 is supposed to be the beginning of this demographic cliff, where the children of the baby buster generation are reaching college age. And there are too many schools chasing too few students. And we've had, probably since 2015, over 100 colleges and universities have either closed or merged with others. And I think that's only going to increase in the years to come. COVID didn't help us on that. And schools that were really hurt by COVID, I think are really going to be challenged to come to grips with the demographic cliff that they are facing. And for Biola, we've been planning for this for the last decade. In fact, we started planning for this the year 2012.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we knew this was coming.
Yeah, math, right? You can see
it has not been hard to follow.
Yeah.
And I think, schools our size, I think are going to be okay. I mean, Biola's got 5,000, 5,500 students. Schools that are smaller, that there are, the 1,000 to 1,500 students, unless they are well endowed. And I can count on one hand the number of Christian colleges that are well endowed.
Why do that's always, you read these articles. We all, if we're interested in the higher ed, I was a professor for 10 years, in Christian institutions. And I'm very interested in this topic, but it seems like, people compare Harvard endowments or, $45 billion, that kind of thing. And I'm not talking about that, but why do you think Christian higher ed isn't financially endowed in a way that some of these other institutions are?
Well, I think part of it is because endowment money in the last 20, 30 years has just gotten increasingly harder to raise. The reason for that is because donors, I think, are reluctant to give something in perpetuity, not knowing where the institution is going to be 30, 40 years from now. And they've seen it, especially our donors that are religiously inclined. They've seen enough drift from, in fact, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton were, they were all founded to train ministers. But they've seen drift in Christian colleges too. And so if you're not going to be distinctively Christian and sort of be proud about who you are and double down on that, by the way, those are the schools that are growing today. And if you're trying to be more like the culture, then there's less reason to go to a Christian college than to a state university.
Yeah.
And so I think endowment money is just hard to raise. And people want to see their money going toward tangible projects, to scholarships for students, things like that.
Because there's all kinds of philanthropic articles now, depending on where you read, but it's all about the wealth, the greatest wealth transfer, or something along those lines. And I was just wondering, as your development team, as you look at moving forward,
every school has a planned giving office,
estate gifts,
But those, we have an endowed chair in our philosophy program. That's the first one Biola's had, but it's not. It's not. We're not going to see any of the money until basically all of the founder's family have passed on. That may be 30 years before we see that. So, planned giving is really important, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to help in the near term. With raising endowment money.
And at Acton, when we talk about poverty, some people think simply throwing money at a problem fixes like poverty, and we know that's not true. There's a matrix of things that go into that. And so I don't want to imply, but it does seem that a financial influx would what are the things that fall close or near? What else would help you other than just cash to help us sustain a strong institution?
Well, I think for one, it's really critical that you have clear theological convictions and that they are public, they're transparent, and everybody, even inside the institution and outside, knows that that's who you are. You are unashamed and unabashed about it, and you say this is who we are. And if the state comes after us for our views on marriage and sexuality, so be it. The headwinds against people who have strong Christian convictions about life and sexuality and things like that are pretty strong. In states, especially particularly we're in a state of California.
Yeah, California.
It's particularly strong. But we have seen consistently that God is honoring the schools that make commitments and double down in being who they are and are unashamed about it. And we've just seen that those are, not the only schools that are growing, but they're the majority of the ones that are growing in Christian circles.
Yeah. What do you think contributes to Biola? This isn't a pitch for Biola necessarily, but
I'm not opposed to that.
You're in it, right? Yeah. But it's really some great opportunities, and I've read some things in the news recently. But so you have Talbot School of Theology, you have the Torrey Honors Program. What are some other things that you're excited about?
We have one. The fastest growing part of the university is a School of Cinema and Media Arts.
Okay. That
was recently given the largest gift in Biola's history by the founder of In-N-Out Burgers.
Oh, yes, the Snyders, right?
The Snyder. We've renamed the school. It's the Snyder School of Cinema and Media Arts, a brand new facility. And, the grads they're getting jobs in the entertainment industry. My son's one of them.
Okay.
He graduated from there. He's been producing commercials for the last 10 years or so. with a dozen different production companies in LA. He's traveling all over the world to do this. And I asked the dean of the school several years ago. I said, "What do you think explains the fact that our graduates are getting hired like at the rate that they are in the shadow of the Lucas Film School at USC?"
USC, right?
Yeah, and the school at UCLA is well known. And he said, it's really interesting. He said they show up, which means what he meant by that is that they are reliable. They have character. Their word is their bond. They do the things that they say they're going to do, and you can count on them being people of character. And surprisingly, in the entertainment industry, that is really highly valued.
It's so interesting you say that. I mean, I was having a conversation with my son just several months ago, and he had his first full-time job. He's been mowing lawns for years, pocket cash and volunteering, but this summer is his first full-time real salaried job. And I told him, and within the first 2 weeks, he said 2 managers. He's painting. He's working for a commercial painting company. So it's pretty big. It's not rocket science. And he said within the first 2 weeks, 2 of the managers were fighting for him. They're like, "No, I want Arison." No. And I was like, "Why do you think that is?" He goes, "Well, Dad, remember the first day you told me the 5 words I need to say? What else can I do?"
Hear, hear.
And he goes, "Dad, I've had some downtime, and I just, what else can I do? Where do you need me?" And it is so interesting that those basic things of showing up on time still matter.
I'll give you a great example. One of our grads we had as a student in our business school was headed to the business end of the entertainment industry, but some agents tapped him for acting, and he got cast in a CBS sitcom. Sort of right out of the gate, a huge opportunity, and as a result of that, he was sought out by a very exclusive agency that you don't call them, they call you, and he asked them. He said, "Why did you seek me out? Why were you so interested in me?" And they said it was your acting chops were significant. That was a part of it, but the main reason we wanted you is the reputation you have developed off camera. Because the staff, the PAs, the production assistants, the cinematographer, the camera people, they all talk about how well you treat them and how much you care about them. And they said that's what we wanted. And it was a really great testimony to what kind of person he is. And that's, the good news is that seems to be really well appreciated in the entertainment industry.
Well, a year ago, I was out speaking at another event in Southern California, but I stopped by to say hi to several professors I know at Biola, and I got a tour of the new Kroll School of Business and met some people there. And I think I read, I love the idea of technology and the future of work. And did I hear right that there's going to be an AI
already
lab
up and running?
Up and running. Okay. Yeah. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, it's a great little institute that's a part of the business school, and they're talking about the technology, the coding and all of that. But they're also have an emphasis on the ethics of it and the societal implications to really address those well. And as part, with my background, I think I'm looking forward to being a part of that
for sure.
But it's pretty cutting edge stuff. And we're wrestling with how this can be used profitably, how it can be used ethically, without running afoul of certain legal things, not to mention certain moral standards. Because I think those questions are still largely in the process of being addressed, and I don't think as a culture, we've come to any really solid conclusions about where the guardrails are.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's like when somebody asks a goldfish, "How's the water?" They say, "What's water?" Because they're in it. They don't see it. They don't understand it. And you're right. I think a lot of us are. Most everybody is in that.
I learned that some of my books were part of the Open AI database.
Yeah.
And nobody talked to me about attribution or compensation for that. And I think some of the early attempts at this were really nothing more than large scale plagiarism.
I think that there's absolutely large scale plagiarism is a great way to say it. In fact, let's transition. I mean, you're an ethicist. Bioethics is a specialty of yours. Some people are arguing, we're emerging into a fourth industrial revolution. Some of the language around that, and it's the blurring of the physical. What makes this distinct from the other revolutions is a blurring of the physical, digital, and biological spheres. Like it's all coming together in a way that was less distinct than in the past. Coupled with the velocity, scope, and systems impact of all of those things. Like it's just faster. There's more countries are participating. And where do you see, bioethic wise, ethically, there's a lot of conversations about, manipulations, enhancements, these kinds of things. Or like you said, about large scale plagiarism from large language models. We could go many places with this, but as an ethicist, putting your ethicist hat on, where do you see the current moment and where we're headed?
Well, I think the issues that we raise about human enhancement, I think are still, and it's been this way, I think, for about the last decade, are still the most pressing and has the most unresolved issues in bioethics today. And that fusion that you're talking about has put the transhumanist movement on steroids in the last 2 or 3 years. And we've still, I think, not done a great job of distinguishing between healing disease and enhancing otherwise normal traits in human beings. And those lines, the treatment enhancement distinction, I think has worked for a while, but in the middle there's lots of fuzzy gray area in the middle that we're just having trouble sorting out. And the reason I think this is so challenging is because it's taking root in this high autonomy culture that we have fostered for the last 30 or 40 years, where you be you, you do you, and if that means changing who you are, all the transgender stuff has fed into this. But why can't we change who we are, genetically, biologically? And Elon Musk is already talking about implanting chips in the brain. And that 10 years ago, people were writing about that in journals as though it was science fiction. But that's here today. And I think this is where our theological resources can really help us make that distinction, because I think those things that are the result of the general entrance of sin into the world are fair game for the goals of medicine. And so, for example, I think aging is a result of the general entrance of sin into the world. And I think there are a lot of technologies that I think are designed to delay and to offset some of the effects of aging. I think cosmetic surgery, I think that's not totally vanity related, but to get rid of some of the stuff that I've got at my age, I think is totally appropriate. And some of the things that have to do with alleviating infertility, I think are all appropriate. Now, we've got to have guardrails on some of those things too. But I think the things that are the
are you talking about like IVF?
I think some of those. I don't have a problem with IVF in principle, but the standard of practice, I think it has lots of issues that have to be addressed. But I think there are other things that we have to accept as givens. I say except in cases of intersex, our biological sex is probably one of those things that we accept as a given and learn to live with that. I think our general level of intelligence, I think is part of the given. Our natural giftedness is part of some of the givens of what we are designed to do.
Would you say it's it's a way of a constraint? We're constrained by certain things. We can't be all things to all. We can't.
It's part of being human. I think is recognizing that we have limitations.
Limitations, right?
And some of the limitations, I think we can attempt to overcome. But I think others, are just part of the givens of life, and that's That's who we are as human beings. It's who God has made us. It's not a result of sin, but we do have limits that I think we need to give proper respect to.
Yeah. And that aging one is, I mean, you follow the algorithm. If you start poking around on Twitter or some of these, I'm not on TikTok, but I'm on some of the other platforms. But I know it's vibrant on TikTok as well. Is like the bros, if these guys that are trying to say, I want to live to 120 or I want to live to 150, and they're doing all kinds of strange regimens, but it's this extension of life. I mean, obviously Ray Kurzweil and the others, the cryogenic freezing in Scottsdale, and that you can go crazy with that. But there's a whole movement.
Cryogenic freezing in the desert of all places.
Of all places, right?
Go figure.
But I do find that this idea of what does it mean, longevity? The philosopher David Nye argues that technical progress is America's civil religion, and always thinking about progress, and so human progress, what kind of human evolution, can we accelerate that? Can we live longer? It really is dominating, especially a lot of young men are buying into some of this. And so there's nothing wrong with being healthy. I mean, my own, just to get personal just for a minute, 2 years ago, I've had major spine issues, and that ended up leading to some of the complications was an embolism.
Oh.
And I was at Acton University here in Grand Rapids, and I walked up a set of stairs, and they think that's when the embolism hit. And ER had to work through that, and then eventually emergency spine surgery.
Oh.
But for 2 years, I was bad. They do injections. They have this whole, modern healthcare. You have these protocols if you're with insurance, and I followed all these protocols, and they just couldn't fix it. I was walking like 2,000 steps a day.
Oh.
I got heavier than I've ever been in my entire life. And once I was on 8 medicines, medicines, weight gain, all of that. But once I had the surgery and they fixed the pain point in my spine that was causing the nerve issues, and I was able to become more mobile, and I was able to walk more, the medical field didn't want anything else to do with me. I had to go find an outside a physiologist who understands body mechanics, how food works for different body. And in the last 5 months, I've lost 40 pounds. I'm walking 12,000 steps a day. And it just trying to work through that and get healthier that way. But I had to go through a whole list of research because these people do try to say, well, I guess the main thing is I found that the medical community, once they couldn't technically fix you with a drug or a surgery, they didn't want anything to do with you. Like my cardiologist, they just let you go because all they want to do is prescribe. So that the industry itself seems to be going in a way that if a technical way of fixing you can't be found, that your body is. So I just find it interesting from an ethical perspective that many people who are in need of good care for their bodies and their souls, they either have somebody trying to say, you can live till you're 150 if you take these 1,000 supplements or some sort of hyper special diet, or the medical field, they're like, well, let's just figure out a drug. The joke about Ozempic, you follow all this, on Monjour and these others. Well, now they figure out that some of the weight loss is coming from, I chose not to do that, and because it eats muscle. A lot of the weight loss comes from the eating of muscle. Well, now the two main companies in competition that create the two competing drugs are now creating a follow-on drug that's essentially a steroid to build muscle back. You know what I mean? So they just, it's just a perpetual cycle. What do you think about the medical community? That was just my personal experience. But I see it more and more now. For some reason, I'm more attuned into it just because of my last 2-year experience in the medical world. Do you think that's a problem, thinking that everything can be merely solved by either another medicine or another procedure?
Well, I think we have medicalized lots of conditions that we used to call sin. Yeah. And I think could use therapy and repentance and spiritual direction and things like that. Now, I have no doubt that there are lots of conditions that are caused by or exacerbated by brain chemistry types of issues,
for sure,
for which the medication is totally appropriate.
Yeah.
But I worry about how much has been medicalized. Carl Elliott, who's a physician bioethicist at the University of Minnesota, has written this great book called Better Than Well.
Better Than Well, okay.
Describing this whole enhancement, regimen. And I say, for the people who want to live to be 150, I say, maybe there's a difference between what we can do and what we should do.
Mm-hmm.
And living that long, I think for one, I think you lose the urgency to complete your life's goals. If you've got this sort of almost indefinite time period to live, nobody's saying anything about what the quality of life is going to be at 140.
Right.
So if I get to 90, I'll be thrilled.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can get to 90 without losing my marbles, I'll be especially delighted.
Right.
But I think there's some things that we can do that we need to ask about another question. Should we be doing this? Because, if I live and work till, 120 or 130, what does that say about the opportunities for the next generation to come along? I mean, I think there are times, at a certain age, I think you retire, you step off the stage and, hand the baton to the next generation. And if people are living that long, I don't know what that's going to do.
There's social implications there.
They're clear, that I don't think we've even begun to think about.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, it seems always has been counterintuitive to me. The wealthier a culture gets, the less children they have. And usually it's developing nations, they have more and more children, largely because of infant mortality. But many Western countries, including America, if you parse out different ways of thinking about it, the fertility replacement rate is we're below.
Dangerously low.
Yeah, we're either at replacement rate or below. But then some countries, South Korea, is in a literal death spiral. Cultural death spiral. Japan has been that way.
They've been there for a while.
Yeah, but South Korea just surpassed it this year. Russia and some of the Eastern Bloc countries are definitely below fertility replacement rate. China, who had the famous, we don't need to recap that 30-year history of the one-child policy, and then the gender side, favoring boys over girls.
Right.
But now they are incentivized. They realize their mistake over the last, this is well known. But now they can't. What's interesting to me is it was so culturally embedded that they can't. They incentivize people to have 2 or 3 children, and they don't want to. Even though they're financial,
they can't afford them.
They can't afford them. They just don't. The lifestyles are different. They're like, we see now we don't want a child. And so China is desperately, India took over. India is now at 1.45 billion people for the most populous country. And what do you think, like mentally, about is it? And this is fraught in the Christian world. When marriage is good, and do you think a natural outworking of marriage should be children? I know there's a lot of complicating factors, but married people should generally.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
You get married in order to start a family and to raise kids together. And I think we're losing some of that. And I think we want to make sure that single people, who are not married, especially older single people, are not viewed as second-class spiritual citizens in the church, because singleness and marriage are moral equivalents in the Scripture.
Yep.
And there are times, Paul argues there are times when being single is more prudent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure this is one of them in the West.
It was the economic correlation that was more fascinating to me. Generally speaking, the wealthier, shouldn't you be able to have at least 2.19 is the number, but shouldn't you be able to have 2 children? And it just seems the culture, if you follow some of the social media and articles being published, people are, young people there's despair, there's anxiety around raising a family.
Well, and I think it's despair about just their own general direction.
Yeah.
And if if your economic prospects are uncertain, I think probably it might be a good thing to wait to have children. But I think to put it entirely on hold, I don't think is warranted because we've had generations and generations of people who had kids and were terrified of the financial implications of that. I mean, I'm one of those.
We're raising our hands, yes.
But God seems to provide, and I think in the developing world, I think children are still largely seen as economic assets, where I think in the West, children are largely seen as economic liabilities. Mm-hmm. In fact, the children are a gift from Psalm 127. I think was largely because children were viewed as assets for the family. I think you say that to most people today, and they just think, well, when's that day going to start?
Yeah.
And I think it costs to send a kid to college. In 20 years from now, I can't imagine what that's going to be. And so that's overwhelming. That by itself is overwhelming for most couples to think about. So I get that. The financial uncertainty, you're bringing a child into financial uncertainty. And a child is a certain commitment to an uncertain future. That's true. But, so is debt. And we don't have any problem going into debt today. But that's very similar. So I'm hopeful that some of this may be trending back in the other direction. But I think there's a ways to go culturally and economically before we're at a place where I think that's going to be widespread.
Yeah, you've done, fantastic work at Biola and Talbot. You obviously are using your vocation there. Where do you? We need you. We need voices like this in the church as well. We just talked about very deep, some theological that we could probably have a podcast on each one of those separate topics. Where do you find your vocation being used or where do you like to use it, your giftedness in the church itself?
Yeah. I don't get too many opportunities to preach in churches, but I get a few. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'll be speaking at a church in Orange County on the theology of work.
Fantastic.
I love it. I think that's an area where, I love to talk about that just to people who are slugging it out in the marketplace, week in and week out. So that they can have some sort of sense of the sacredness of their work. And then, in bioethics, I think there's several areas where the church is largely undereducated. And reproductive technology, I think, is one of those. I can't tell you how many couples I've talked to who've gone through IVF and they've got embryos left over. I think, what the heck do I do now?
Yeah, what do I do with these?
Because they've got, they got these bouncing children in their arms, and they know that there's continuity between these babies they're holding and the embryos that are in the lab. They're not just clumps of cells to these couples. That's really challenging. And then walking, how to help people walk through the end of life with their loved ones. Really challenging stuff. I'd spoken in a large church on this some time ago, and I asked, I said, show of hands. There's probably 2,500 people in the audience, and I said, how many of you have walked with a loved one through the end of life? Almost everybody raised their hand. How many of you had to make decisions about turning off life support? About 2/3 of the people raised their hands for that. How many of you felt well prepared to walk that journey? No hands go up. Nobody's well prepared for this. And we talk about, in our churches, resurrection and eternity, hopefully more than once a year. We talk about that all the time. Why don't we say anything about how resurrection and eternity impact how we walk with people through the end of life?
Well, I think you do a great job by modeling what you're talking about in theology of work, by trying to do your own work where you're an expert in, and use that in your profession. Yeah, you've been a fantastic administrator and professor, but the work in the church too that is needed. The church needs professionals. I think that's part of that cycle of theology of work.
Well, as you know, if we lose the battle for ideas in the local church, we've lost.
Yep.
End of story.
Well, Scott, really, thank you for joining us for another
my pleasure.
Acton University. Thank you for the work you've done in higher education, Christian higher education, and over the last almost 40 years. And we're delighted you're here. And I'm thankful for the work you're doing. And Thank you for the ethical stimulations and engagements that you're continuing to produce. I'm glad the 5th edition of your book is coming out. And we just look forward to hearing many more great things from you.
Well,
Thanks.
Appreciate that, Dan. Happy to be with you, and always happy to be part of what Acton's doing.
Thanks, Scott.
As always, thank you for listening. Our team loves putting this podcast together for you. It's encouraging to hear from our listeners. Feedback is incredibly important because it lets us know what topics you are interested in most. If you have comments, feedback, or ideas for a show topic or interesting guest, you can email our team at producer@acton.org. Until next week, for Acton Line, I'm Mark Townsend.